My name is Juliet Gilkes Romero. I'm a stage and screenwriter, and I'm a trustee on the board of HighTide Theatre. So the mission of HighTide actually is to create a writing powerhouse, if you like, in the east of England. It is a writer-centered theatre company, and our role is to go out there, find new talent, and to encourage that talent, develop it so that by 2030, which is the goal, we have a real seedbed of great writers making their mark in the industry from the east of England. It's a mission that I'm, 100% behind. I think it's great. There are many diverse communities in the east of England, fantastic communities, and they need to be embraced in terms of storytelling and what they can contribute to the country's wider theatre ecology. And I guess having grown up in the east of England, as I said, it's something that I'm very keen to support. But I know that there's so many pockets of interest throughout the region in terms of history and climate and social justice. I think all of these things need to be excavated, but the most important thing is that we want to do is give power, give voice to young people, and not just young people, people who want to write, who want to tell their stories, and those who think they've got stories, to help them manifest those and to get them onto the stage, but to also give them the identity and the support from HighTide Theatre. I think the clue is in the name HighTide. We hold climate crisis and the debate around that really, really seriously. And it reminds us of our responsibilities as local citizens, community citizens, and then global citizens, as how we take care of the planet. And we do have an issue in the east of England with crumbling coastlines and certainly in the past, before they built sea barriers and stuff, that there had been serious flooding in the region. So I think we are finding writers who care very much about what they see as a climate crisis, and that and social justice go hand in hand. So I think that through HighTide, we can attract very interesting and telling stories about where we are now and where we will see ourselves in the future in terms of the environment in which we live. I think the main thing is that it can bring an East of England voice, shine a light on writers from this region and the stories that they want to tell, so that they can then be appreciated and shared and enjoyed, because storytelling is about connection. And if we don't share our stories, other people won't know about where we're from and our environment and how different that is. Each region in this country has a unique style and sense of identity. I worked in Merseyside as a trainee local radio news reporter, and I remember being absolutely blown away by the sense of identity in Liverpool and the way that people saw themselves. And I think that particular region has created immense talent and creativity through music and writing. And I think the East of England can do the same. And this is what HighTide wants. And again, the goal, by 2030 is to be able to really embed storytelling and theatre culture within communities in the East of England, but to also make sure that we have a seedbed of exceptional, diverse and thriving playwriting talent in the East, which we wish to share from Suffolk and beyond. I think it can. Because it's, it is innate, it is here. It's about liberating those voices and making sure that people find their place and in an evolving world. So, for example, we've just launched our playwriting cohort. We've got a year-long writing scheme, 6 writers, and I reminded them that the world that we're living in today will look very different to this world by the end of the course. We've got a series of global elections coming up. Donald Trump could be back in power in the United States, for example, by the end of November. Sadly, we have conflict in Ukraine. We're seeing upheaval in the Middle East because of what's happened in Israel and Gaza, and by extension, the West Bank and Lebanon. Then we have a series of climate crises. These are things that just because you're from the East of England doesn't mean that you shouldn't engage. And what I've said to that cohort is, my role is to really encourage them to think outside of the box never allow themselves to be boxed in, to remind them that they need to intersect as East of England writers with what's happening on the world stage. All of that can be a parallel for whether they're from Norwich or Great Yarmouth or Ipswich or Bury St Edmunds. But at the end of the day, we are all intersectional. And I think that really great writers are able to bridge those gaps and draw us all together, because we are one humanity and it is about connection and shared storytelling. I think because when I came to Suffolk, it was the Wolsey Theatre, and then it became the New Wolsey Theatre. It's been in this landscape for a long time, and fortunately, it is still with us, because I think when it moved from the Wolsey to the New Wolsey, it was going through economic threat. HighTide has been with us in the theatre landscape since about 2007, and also HighTide has been through an evolution from, that there were festivals attached to its name, but now the main focus for HighTide is finding new writers within the region. So I think that the combination of the New Wolsey's history and voice, and I remember the plays that I went to see at the Wolsey Theatre, and I'm glad it was there, and I'm glad my parents took me. So that was back in the early 80s. And then, married with HighTide, which the kind of attraction of HighTide, I think, is that it draws in young people into storytelling and theatre. When you marry that kind of powerhouse of what the New Wolsey Theatre represents regionally, and HighTide with its kind of encompassing climate, or rather social justice and climate crisis. When you bring all of those elements together, I think you've got something very exciting and important with legacy. I think it's interesting, as a writer, because this is not an easy industry. And I always try to share, particularly with people coming in, new writers, that not only do they have to be creatively resilient, they need to be financially resilient. So they have a responsibility to themselves and how they maintain themselves for survival, but they also need to understand how theatres operate and the economic pressures which are brought to bear on theatre buildings and how they survive. And we saw that as a result of pandemic. Theatre creatives and freelancers were the first to truly suffer and to find themselves out of work as buildings, they shed staff, freelancers were let go of. And we have a constant evolution in terms of how theatres are structured. Do they keep a literary department, or do they lean more towards working with associates? What is the staff structure in a building? And all these questions lead to, how does work by burgeoning writers, new writers, how does that get read, accessed, and encouraged if those staff complements are changing as a result of economic pressures? And there is no easy answer to any of this. I think that those theatres that do better are those who remember that they are the beating heart of the communities that they are embedded in, and that they fight to ensure that they respond to their responsibilities to those communities and make sure that they are constantly nurturing, developing, and reading the work of people who want to play on our stages, local and national. But it isn't easy. But at the same time, there was a balance between realism and being idealistic. A community cannot thrive without the arts. So for me, the arts and cultures must be maintained by any means necessary. And I think that those people who are smart and passionate about our writers, our storytelling, and the communities in which they live, that they will fight to manage these economic hard times and keep the lights on in theatre.